Hey everybody, Ryan here. Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios and to, for the first time in a long time, a free VST plugin showcase and demonstration. Remember when I made these? Before the dark times? Before the Empire? It's not like there's exactly been a huge drought of worthy freeware the past few years, but I have been looking at a lot more premium gear and some used items that have been sitting around on my real shelves for years. So this series kind of got sent to the back burner. But nonetheless, I thought it would be a good time to check some of this stuff out, as there are some other developers and creators that I would like to look at in the upcoming 6 months or so. But as it turned out, looking at the developers we've already checked out in the past through a more pedal-focused lens actually works out, because many of the ones that I want to check out today are pedals, as it turns out, but we also need an amplifier platform to use it on. Now, many of the offerings I'm going to demonstrate later are of a quality that I think would be no problem to reamp through a real tube amplifier or indeed a paid amplifier sim, but trying to keep with tradition here and the whole spirit of this segment, I'm going to revisit NaLex software and check out some of their newer, not brand new, these were actually updated like a year after I looked at them, amplifier simulations. We initially looked at their like rack style virtual preamps, but now many of them have evolved into sort of full-fledged amplifier simulations, or kind of an all-in-one platform where different configuration files can make it sound like a lot more than just one or two amplifier channels. Tangential to the amplifier sims, these Devils Labs Studios impulse responses are actually linked on the NaLex software blog spots, and we're going to use these as our exclusive cabinet tones throughout the entire video. So you can check all of this stuff out for free at the links in the description, if I remember to put them there for once. And with that, let's get rolling into some very different, wide variety of guitar tones, even a bass tone in there. No intro song this time. There's just way too much going on here to make it fit into one musical piece. A couple noteworthy things before we get started here. First off, the impulse response loader that I'm using here, Fractal Audio Systems Cab Lab, is not free, but the IRs themselves, as I mentioned earlier, are. So it doesn't really matter which loader you prefer. There's dozens of them out there at this point. Use whatever you like. I simply prefer to stick with Cab Lab because you can see the frequency response and time domains, depending on which view you like. And of course, we can mix and match, though I don't think I made a single IR mix here. We're just using one at a time. So that's not really of major consequence, but you will be able to see at least which one I chose. Throughout a lot of these amp-centric demonstrations as well, we will be using NaLex products. Still haven't heard that pronounced. I don't really know how to say that. There are multiple iterations of these, what started as preamps when I looked at them several years ago at this point. But the main star of the show is this Amplex. I believe that he's working on a newer iteration called something like True Tone. I'd like to check that out at a later date when it's a little bit more developed. But for now, the Amplex software is basically kind of this machine learning-esque style platform where you load in configuration files and it does some stuff in the background and makes it sound more like that amplifier. So this is kind of the culmination of a lot of the past efforts. We're going to be using this as the main amplifier platform for a lot of these guitar sounds, though for a couple of things here, we're not going to use any amplifier or even cabinet for one demonstration. So let's get started with the MTA, the Mercuriall Metal Area. As I'm sure everyone can tell, this is the Boss Metal Zone. This is a pedal that was recently demonstrated on the newest installment of Pedalhead, and a clone of which I've used on multiple tone engineers and other focused videos. And this is one that I downloaded when it was relatively new, but I just kind of sat on it, hadn't needed to bust it out for anything until the past year or so, when I started tracking tones that would be more Metal Zone centric, especially those that are in front of an amplifier. So this was a really good stand-in to practice with, and to kind of dial in a direct capture tone that was going to be representative of the final product with the real pedal. So this one does pretty much the real deal if you're looking for a Metal Zone style pedal. This does all the tricks in the book when it comes to the big mid scoop. You got them actually separated in terms of the middle frequency, middle control, and high and low, unlike the actual pedals. This is more like the Behringer clone, which is I actually prefer, honestly. It's not as clean looking, but easier to use. And for these demonstrations, I'm going to be using this just as kind of a preamp only, going straight into a cab IR because it does a pretty decent job at that. And then I'll also be slamming it in front of a Friedman style amplifier for some more sludgy boost pedal style tones. I won't spend a ton of time on this one as it's a pretty straightforward Tube Screamer boosted rectifier sound with the NaLex Pectifier going through the Blue Dragon impulse responses. I've actually blended a couple of them here with some various high cut, low cut blending just to get rid of some of the excess fizz and boom, but fit the riff, I thought. And this is more than anything an introduction into Nembrini's free pedal. So they have multiple offerings. We've actually looked at their previous releases with some rack analog stuff, which I thought was pretty decent for being free. Give you a little bit of more of an analog flavor to some of the chorus and delay effects that we normally would use. And this is one such free offering. You probably already have a Tube Screamer, but this is totally fine and has a typical TS9 kind of profile to it. The next free offering from Nembrini is the Black pedal, obviously inspired by the Proco Rat, though this one's drive isn't quite as nasty as a real Rat. Between this and their next pedal, I think they just simply don't have the hard clipping modeling down to a T yet. It's not bad. It just sounds a little too soft clipping or even almost like a red LED clipping profile, though it's not quite Turbo Rat either. That does help blend in with tube distortion a little better when it's in front of an amplifier, but it also doesn't have quite that spitty, compressed, really hard transient thing that Rats do, and especially doesn't turn into almost a fuzz pedal when it's cranked around the noon or above region. Either way, it is useful as a boost pedal, and it does have that unmistakable filter kind of profile when you dial that in to be wide open or even all the way closed. So I do like this in terms of a thrashy style boost, but I wouldn't expect it to do what something like the R47 from TSE does either. For this, I'm going to use the JCM 800 model on Amplex, and then we're going to do a more shall we say, fuzzed out tone, though it still doesn't get quite fuzzy to the extent I would like to see. With first tone using this symbolic style, scooped out death kind of sound. And for the next one, it will be a little more mid-focus, though still some big old spikes. Nembrini's final offering is the, depending on where you're from, Minotaur, Minotaur, clone. That's what matters. You can definitely tell what it is. This was another VST plugin that helped me prepare for a recent pedal head. And just like the black pedal, this doesn't quite do the same thing with the gain structure. It does seem to at least get a little more mid-focus as you turn up the gain, which the real pedal does. So that's a good feature there, but it doesn't have that soft, hard clipping quality to it with that clean blend on top. It just kind of sounds soft clippish the whole time. The treble output controls seem correct to me, though, and definitely do the clone thing. So I'll be using this more as a clean boost with just a hint of saturation and clipping on the peak attacks, but otherwise it's going to be used as mostly a clean boost. And you'll be able to hear how it responds in front of more high gain amplifiers as we progress down the stack here. For this one demonstration with reverb, I'm using the TAL Reverb 2. Showed this off in a Shit You Need installment. I think this and TAL 3 are really nice. So if you haven't picked those up yet and want a good plate reverb, go check this one out as well. The last guitar-centric pedal of the bunch is the Dr Drive by Audiority, the same vendor that brings us the Valve State 8100 emulation, as well as a Randall RG100. I think they even got a tube version, one of the Ignator collab models. So they got quite a few interesting and unique offerings you don't see every day. And this one being a free version of a common pedal nowadays, I think, for a lot of metal applications is good because it is still a Tube Screamer style boost, but it does a few things differently, and I think is definitely an improvement for contemporary metal genres. And for those that don't recognize this, it is indeed an emulation of the Horizon Devices Precision Drive by Misha Mansour's collaboration with MXR. It's basically a Tube Screamer circuit underneath, but you do have some additional tonal sculpting with this low cut capacitor on the attack switch here. Choose between different values. This is something that Protone was doing beforehand, which just so happened to also make Misha Mansour's pedals. So little conflict of interest there potentially, but whatever. Nonetheless, it also includes the gate functionality found on that pedal. So if you're looking for just like a Tube Screamer style boost, you don't want to go the full-blown Fortin route with like the 33 or the grind or whatever. You don't want to pay the neural DSP prices. Then I think this will give you a lot of the same functionality, and it works just as fine for a lot of 7-string and especially 6-string applications. It's when you start getting down into 8-string stuff that this doesn't quite cut it for me, but it's not bad. Bright is your tone controls, you might imagine. And it pairs with decent amplifiers, 5150s, rectifiers, stuff that probably needs boosts worse than that. This is what you'll want to use it with. So got a couple different levels of gentiness, and it works. We'll finish this off with a bit of a PSS throwback with the TSE Audio BOD bass overdrive. TSE being the first developer I actually ever showcased on the channel about 6 years ago at this point, which is crazy. So it's kind of kicked off my free plugin series. I don't think I showcased this pedal among those collections, but I could be wrong. I think it was all guitar stuff. Regardless, it doesn't really matter because it has gone into a V2, and as you might be able to recognize, this is kind of a SansAmp, Tech 21 emulation. Has most of the stuff on here that you would expect, except for a cabinet emulation, which is a bit of a bummer because I do like that sound on a lot of their newer units. But even without it, it does have that signature clank, and with the blend control, you can get a lot of those recorded late 80s, early 90s kind of sounds or stuff that you still hear live today. It's a really useful pedal, and I would strongly recommend that you experiment with this and any of the dark glass style emulations in front of a bass amplifier, whether it be totally clean or have a little bit of tube push. But by itself, it's really, really useful. Though to cover up some of my sloppier bass playing, I am going to use a free compressor here, at least free in terms of included with Cubase, but you can use whatever you want if you wanted to do some pre-compression going into this. Nonetheless, if you need kind of that contemporary bass sound without going full-blown dark glass, look no further. I think this will get you there for no cost. So that's going to do it for this long overdue free VST showcase tutorial type thing. If I had to give any feedback or final conclusions on any of this stuff, I think some of these are no-brainer downloads if you're looking for that type of tone, whereas some of them are a little on the underwhelming side. It's hard to complain about any of this stuff for being free. But in terms of, like, I think you need to go out and get it right now. I think if you're looking for a Metal Zone type sound, this is it. This is a great boost pedal from Audiority here. And there's nothing wrong with the 808, but a lot of people probably already have that, so it's not jumping off the page at me. The Black and Minotaur, I think, could use a little bit of work to really capture the higher gain sounds when you push the drive controls, but as mostly clean boosts, they work really well. So if you want to get that style of boost sound in a VST plugin, there's certainly nothing wrong with them. I would just very much like to see something that really captures that Klon feel in the gain structure. So I'd love to see this updated later down the road. TSE, though, with this one is a bit older here. The BOD is a must-have if you like the SansAmp sound and you don't want to spend any money on it. This is one of the only options, but I think it is a good option. Just be prepared to use cab IRs if that's something you want to hear. It's actually going to be more accurate because the SansAmp cab emulation is a little more rudimentary. Still sounds good, still works, but it's just basically EQ. Unfortunately, I feel that the weakest link on all these demonstrations were the amplifiers from NaLex. It doesn't sound like a huge step up from the demonstrations I did 3-4 years ago at this point. They're fine, but they're not revolutionary by any means. They don't even really sound evolutionary. I think part of that is because I was pairing those preamp only modules at that point with a power amp I was familiar with, and I really personally like better. As a package, they're not bad. I like the user interface better at this point, but it's just not doing it for me in terms of the high frequency response. There is some aliasing there, no matter what quality settings you put it on. At 8x oversampling, I really shouldn't be hearing what I am hearing, and it should not take it, to 16x or 32x oversampling to eliminate some of that stuff. And it doesn't even really matter. I've tested it outside of these demonstrations. This doesn't make a big difference. So I think they're cool. Definitely a good way to experience a lot of these tones. And some of these are actually really stand out. I think the Crunchman and some of the ones that I did not feature here, like the Ninja, the Gerbert, things that I was impressed with previously, still hold up fairly well. But I would not expect a complete overhaul, even though it might lead you to believe it is with the newer artwork and styling here. As far as the impulse responses go, you can't go wrong. You can never have too much unless it becomes problematic for you, but I always like having more impulse responses in my collection. I think a couple of these, at least, that I did not really get into much, are more simple EQ matches than they are real cabinets. I mean, you can see with the frequency response here, this looks a little too smooth to be real. Does very much look like a IR that was created out of EQ rather than vice versa. So that's fine, but I think this is Redneck Collection is the only one that does that. The rest of them appear real to me, so I definitely will not turn down any more free cab sounds, and I think these punch above their weight class in terms of their value, especially compared to what some of these pedals are offering. So check them all out. It won't hurt, but I would definitely say if you're going to try something different in terms of free offerings, maybe look around rather than the NaLex stuff for now. As always, thank you so much for watching. Leave any questions or comments down below, suggestions for free plugin demonstrations. I'm always open to hearing them. Whether or not I get to them is another story. And we will see you next time. Bye.